You make a good salary. On paper, six figures. The kind of number your parents once said meant you'd be set. But every month feels like a quiet emergency. Rent rises. Groceries cost more. The student loan payment never shrinks. Your credit card balance resets to zero for a moment, then climbs back like a tide you can't stop. So you do what you're supposed to do. You work harder. You budget. You skip small pleasures. Still, the feeling stays. That one bad week could knock everything over. Not poor, not rich, just balanced on the edge. This story isn't about failure, it's about how the ground under young adults has shifted without anyone really explaining it. Wages look higher, but so are interest rates. So is inflation. So is the cost of simply existing. In the next few minutes, we're going to slow this down. Not to scare you, not to sell you a solution. Just to make sense of why earning more doesn't always feel like moving forward anymore. The warning signs usually don't arrive as headlines, they show up in ordinary moments. When your rent renewal jumps by $300 and no one at work gets a raise. When your car needs a repair and you quietly put it on a credit card, telling yourself you'll handle it later. When friends with good jobs start canceling plans, not because they're busy, but because they're too tired of spending. None of this feels like a crisis, it feels like life. But these small pressures are how financial stress actually builds, not in explosions, but in slow leaks. A generation ago, a higher income created breathing room. Today, it often just buys stability at a higher price. Housing costs rise faster than paychecks. Interest rates turn every loan into a heavier burden. Inflation quietly shrinks what your money can do. So even at $100,000, many young adults live with the same question their parents faced at half that salary. What happens if something goes wrong? That question doesn't mean you're failing. It means the system around you has changed. And understanding that change is the first step toward feeling less alone in it. When people talk about financial shocks, it sounds dramatic, like stock markets crashing or banks failing. But for most of us, a shock is quieter. It's a medical bill you didn't plan for, a few weeks without work, a sudden rent hike, a higher interest rate on your credit card. In simple terms, a financial shock is anything that breaks the balance between what you earn and what you owe. And the reason it feels so intense today is that many young adults are already operating with no cushion. Your income covers your life, but barely. There's no soft place to land. This is where interest rates and inflation quietly matter. Higher rates mean every dollar you borrow costs more over time. Inflation means every dollar you earn buys a little less each year. So when something unexpected happens, you're not just solving one problem. You're solving it inside a system that makes recovery slower and stress heavier. That's why even strong earners feel fragile. Not because they're irresponsible, but because the margin for error has almost disappeared. And living without margin changes how safe the future feels. To understand why this feels so widespread, it helps to zoom out for a moment. Not to scare ourselves, just to notice patterns. Around the world, financial stress often follows the same path. Prices rise, debt grows, wages lag behind. Then a shock hits and people realize how thin the safety net really was. In the late 1990s, countries in Asia faced the IMF crisis. In the 2000s, Argentina struggled with inflation and currency collapse. Greece faced debt and austerity. Turkey and Venezuela saw their money lose value fast. Different places, different politics, but the same lesson. When living costs outpace incomes for too long, stability becomes fragile. The US is not those countries, but the emotional experience can feel similar. Not collapse, just constant pressure. Rent rising faster than paychecks, student debt stretching into your 30s, credit cards quietly becoming emergency funds. Global stories show us something important. Financial stress doesn't start with panic. It starts with normal people slowly losing room to breathe. And that's the part many young Americans recognize today. Not fear of disaster, but the feeling that even doing everything right still leaves you close to the edge. When we bring this back to everyday American life, the impact feels less like economics and more like exhaustion. You earn more than previous generations did at your age. But you also carry more weight. Student loans follow you into your 30s. Credit cards fill the gaps your paycheck can't cover. Car payments stretch longer. Rent takes the biggest bite before anything else even begins. This is what paycheck to paycheck looks like now. Not always struggling, just constantly managing. Always calculating. If I pay this, can I still afford that? If something breaks, what gets delayed? And the pressure isn't just financial, it's emotional. Living this way trains your brain to stay on alert, to worry quietly, to feel like stability is something you have to defend every month instead of something you can rely on. That's why earning more doesn't always feel like winning. It often feels like upgrading the size of the responsibility without changing the level of safety. The numbers get bigger, the margin doesn't. And for many young adults, that's the hardest part to explain, even to themselves. This is where all those economic words you hear in the background start to matter in real life. Interest rates, inflation, housing prices, liquidity. They sound distant, but they quietly shape your month. When the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, it's meant to slow inflation. But for you, it means your credit card balance grows faster. Your car loan costs more. Buying a home moves further away. When inflation stays high, your raise feels smaller before it even hits your bank account. Housing prices do something similar. When rents and home values rise faster than wages, shelter stops being just a place to live. It becomes the main source of financial stress. Not because you want more, but because stability costs more every year. Even things like exchange rates and global markets matter in the background. When the dollar shifts or overseas economies struggle, prices on everyday goods can rise here too. Not overnight. Quietly, one bill at a time. None of this means the system is broken, but it does mean young adults are carrying more risk than they realize. And risk, when you live close to the edge, doesn't feel like a concept. It feels like constant tension. In a big financial crisis, you often hear strange terms like credit default swaps or liquidity problems. They sound technical, but the ideas behind them are simple. A credit default swap is basically insurance on debt. When people start buying a lot of this insurance, it's a sign they're worried someone won't be able to pay. It doesn't cause stress by itself. It reveals it, like smoke before a fire. Liquidity is even simpler. It means how easily money moves when it's needed. In calm times, cash flows. Loans get approved. Bills get paid. In tense times, everything slows. Banks get cautious. Companies freeze hiring. People hold on to every dollar. And for young adults, this shows up in quiet ways. Fewer job openings, tighter credit, higher requirements for apartments and loans. Nothing dramatic, just more doors that don't open as easily as they used to. You don't need to track markets to feel this. You feel it when life becomes harder to adjust. When flexibility disappears, and when being financially okay starts to feel more fragile than it should. When things start to feel fragile, people often ask the same question. What are the adults in the room doing about this? The government, the Federal Reserve, the institutions that are supposed to keep the system steady. In a crisis, their tools are big and slow. The Fed can lower interest rates to make borrowing cheaper. The government can send relief checks, expand unemployment benefits, or support struggling industries. These actions matter. They prevent total collapse. They keep money moving when fear would otherwise freeze everything. But here's the part that's easy to miss. These solutions work at the system level first. Banks, companies, markets. It takes time for that stability to reach individual lives. So even when you hear that the economy is being supported, your own situation may still feel tight for months or years. That gap is where a lot of young adults live, protected from disaster, but not yet feeling safe. And understanding that difference can help explain why things feel so heavy, even when the headlines sound calm. When you live in that gap between the system is stable and my life feels unstable, it changes how you think about the future. Big goals start to feel abstract. Buying a home, starting a family, even saving for retirement can feel like something for another version of you, a calmer, more secure version that hasn't arrived yet. Instead, your focus shrinks to the present. Make it through this month. Handle this bill. Keep everything balanced just a little longer. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a natural response to living with thin margins. But over time, it can quietly steal your sense of direction. This is where money stops being just numbers and becomes emotional weight. You're not lazy, you're not careless, you're tired of feeling like stability is always one step ahead of you. And before we talk about strategies or solutions, it's important to name this clearly. Many young adults aren't failing at money. They're navigating a version of adulthood where the rules changed, but the expectations didn't. And that mismatch is where so much of today's financial anxiety really comes from. So what does any of this mean for you, personally? It doesn't mean you need to predict the next crisis or track every economic indicator. But it does help to understand how the system shapes your daily choices. Take interest rates again. When rates rise, debt becomes heavier. That makes credit cards, student loans, and car payments more than just expenses. They become emotional anchors, pulling your future closer to the present. Inflation does something similar. It makes saving feel pointless when prices keep climbing, even though saving is exactly what creates safety over time. And housing ties it all together. When rent takes a larger share of your income each year, every other goal gets postponed. Not because you don't care, but because shelter always comes first. Seeing these forces clearly can change how you talk to yourself. You stop thinking, why can't I get ahead? And start asking, what kind of system am I trying to survive in? That shift doesn't fix everything, but it replaces quiet shame with something more useful, understanding. Now we can finally talk about something practical. Not a shortcut, not a miracle fix, just small ways to create breathing room inside a system that doesn't give much of it. The first shift is mental. Instead of asking how to get rich faster, ask how to feel safer sooner. Safety comes from margin, not income alone, but space between what you earn and what you owe. That space can be built quietly, by lowering fixed costs before chasing higher pay, by treating debt reduction like a form of saving, by seeing cash reserves not as idle money, but as emotional insurance. This isn't about extreme frugality. It's about choosing stability over image. A slightly older car, a smaller apartment, a slower lifestyle that costs less to maintain. These choices don't look impressive online, but they build something more valuable than appearance: control. And control is what most young adults really want. Not wealth, not status, just the ability to breathe when life surprises them. One of the hardest things to accept is that personal finance today isn't really about optimization. It's about protection. Most advice still sounds like the world is stable and predictable. Save this much, invest that much, follow the steps and you'll be fine. But when life feels uncertain, those rules feel distant. So a better starting point is simpler. Build a small buffer before anything else. Not a perfect emergency fund, just enough to cover one surprise. A car repair, a medical bill, a short gap between jobs. That first cushion changes how your brain works. It replaces panic with options. Next, look at the debts that drain your attention the most. Not just the biggest balance, the ones with the highest interest and the loudest emotional cost. Reducing those isn't about being disciplined. It's about lowering the noise in your life. These steps won't make you rich, but they make you steadier. And steadiness in a world that feels unstable is a quiet form of power. Another quiet source of stress is comparison. You see people your age buying homes, traveling, upgrading their lives. It feels like you're behind, even when you're doing everything you can. But what you don't see are the trade-offs behind those moments. The family help, the extra debt, the risk they've accepted that you chose not to take. Your path may look slower, but slower often means safer. This is where mindset matters more than math. Instead of measuring success by milestones, house by 30, six figures by 25, measure it by stability. Fewer nights lying awake about money. Fewer moments of panic when something breaks. More days where your finances feel boring. Boring is underrated. Boring means predictable. And predictable is what turns anxiety into confidence over time. You don't need to win at money. You just need to stop feeling like you're losing. And that shift starts by defining success in a way that actually serves your life, not someone else's highlight reel. It also helps to understand the tools that already exist around you. Not as magic solutions, but as small stabilizers. A high-yield savings account won't change your life, but it can make your emergency fund grow quietly instead of shrinking. A 401k match isn't exciting, but it's one of the few times the system actually adds to your effort instead of taking from it. These aren't wealth hacks, they're shock absorbers, and that's the right way to think about personal finance at this stage of life. Not as a race upward, but as building a suspension system for the road you're already on. Something that softens the bumps so they don't knock you off balance every time. When you frame money this way, the pressure changes. You stop asking how to leap ahead. You start asking how to stay steady. And in a world that keeps shifting under your feet, staying steady is a real achievement, even if no one applauds it. There's another piece of stability that rarely gets talked about. Flexibility. Not the kind that sounds inspiring on posters, but the practical kind that lets you adapt when life shifts. Flexibility means having skills that travel with you, not just a job title tied to one company. It means keeping your lifestyle light enough that you can move, change roles, or take a short step back if you need to. It means building your life so one decision doesn't lock you into 10 years of pressure. For many young adults, the most stressful moments come from feeling trapped. Trapped in a lease you can't afford. Trapped in a car payment you can't escape. Trapped in a job you can't leave because the bills won't wait. So, part of surviving financially isn't just about money. It's about designing your life to have exits. Not because you plan to run, but because knowing you could makes everything feel safer. Security isn't always about having more. Sometimes it's about needing less to stay okay. At some point, it helps to reconnect all of this back to the bigger picture. Not to feel overwhelmed, but to feel oriented. You live inside a system shaped by interest rates, inflation, housing prices, and global money flows. You can't control those forces, but you can decide how exposed you are to them. Every fixed expense you take on, a higher rent, a bigger car payment, more debt, ties your daily life tighter to those forces. When rates rise, you feel it. When prices climb, you feel it. When the job market tightens, you feel it faster. Reducing that exposure is one of the quietest ways to lower anxiety. Fewer financial commitments means fewer things that can hurt you when conditions change. It doesn't mean living small forever. It means choosing when to take risks instead of being forced into them. That's real financial strength for this generation. Not chasing perfect outcomes, just building a life that can bend without breaking. By now, it should be clear that feeling on the edge isn't a personal flaw. It's the result of living in a time when stability costs more and certainty feels rare. But that doesn't mean you're powerless inside it. Power just looks different than we were taught. It's not about dominating the system, it's about narrowing the space where the system can dominate you. Keeping your obligations light, your savings real, your expectations grounded. That kind of power is quiet. It doesn't show up in titles or photos. It shows up in moments most people never see. The calm when your phone buzzes with an unexpected expense. The confidence to say no to a lifestyle upgrade you don't need. The patience to move at your own pace when everyone else seems to be rushing. This is where financial maturity really begins. Not when you earn more, but when you stop letting money decide how safe you feel every day. For a lot of young adults, the hardest shift isn't financial, it's emotional. Letting go of the idea that money will one day solve the feeling of uncertainty. More income helps. Of course it does, but peace rarely arrives all at once with a bigger paycheck. Peace usually comes in smaller ways. Knowing you can cover a surprise. Knowing you can walk away from a bad situation. Knowing you don't have to impress anyone with your lifestyle. That's why the most useful question isn't, how do I get ahead? And it's, how do I make my life feel safer right now? Sometimes the answer is boring. Sometimes it's slower than you'd like. But safety compounds just like money does. Every month you reduce stress instead of adding it. You build momentum in the direction that actually matters. Not toward being rich, but toward being steady. And in a world that keeps changing the rules, steadiness is its own kind of success. When you step back and look at everything we've talked about, a different picture of success starts to form. Not the one we grew up with, not the version built around big numbers and fast progress, but a quieter version, one that feels less exciting but more sustainable. In this version, success is having choices. The choice to rest when you're burned out. The choice to leave a job that no longer fits. The choice to handle a problem without panic. These aren't luxuries. They're signs that you've created a little space between your life and constant pressure. And that space is what most people earning six figures are really chasing, even if they don't know how to name it. Not more things, not more status, just relief from the feeling that everything is fragile. You don't build that relief overnight. You build it slowly. With decisions that look ordinary from the outside, but inside they change how the future feels. From something threatening to something you can finally face without fear. And this is where everything quietly comes together. The economy will keep changing, interest rates will rise and fall, inflation will cool and return, housing will move in cycles. None of that is in your control. Waiting for the perfect moment to feel safe means waiting forever. But there is something you can control. How much of your peace you hand over to those forces. Every time you build a small buffer, you take back a little control. Every time you choose a life that costs less to maintain, you take back a little control. Every time you reduce debt instead of adding it, you take back a little control. This isn't about winning against the system. It's about shrinking its power over your emotions. So money becomes a tool again, not a constant source of tension. You may earn 100,000, you may earn less. Either way, the goal isn't to feel impressive, it's to feel steady. And steadiness, in a world that keeps shifting, is one of the strongest forms of freedom you can build. There's a quiet truth most financial conversations skip. The goal isn't to escape uncertainty. That's not possible. The goal is to live well inside it. Every generation faces its own version of pressure. For yours, it's the mix of high costs, heavy debt, and a future that feels harder to predict. You didn't choose that landscape, but you do get to choose how you move through it. You can choose to build a life that looks impressive, or a life that feels secure. Sometimes those overlap. Often they don't. Security is subtle. It shows up when you can say, "I'll be okay," and actually believe it. When your plans don't depend on everything going right. When one surprise doesn't threaten your sense of stability. This isn't a smaller dream. It's a different one. Not about becoming untouchable, but about becoming resilient. Not about having everything, but about needing less to feel safe. And in a world that keeps shifting under your feet, that kind of safety is one of the most meaningful forms of success you can build. If you've listened this far, you might notice something different about this story. There was no moment where everything suddenly became easy. No turning point where the numbers finally lined up and stress disappeared. That's not a failure of the story. That's the reality most people live in. Progress, for this generation, is quieter. It looks like fewer emergencies, more calm conversations about money, less fear when the future feels unclear. It's the slow replacement of tension with trust. Trust in your ability to handle what comes, even if you don't know exactly what it will be. That trust doesn't come from perfection. It comes from repetition. Paying down a little debt, saving a little buffer, making choices that protect your peace instead of chasing appearances. You may never feel rich in the way movies describe, but you can feel grounded. And being grounded, in a world that keeps shifting, might be the most realistic form of success there is. By now, the title of this story probably feels different. Earning $100,000 and still living on the edge isn't a paradox anymore. It's a description of a world where income alone doesn't guarantee safety. And once you see that clearly, something important shifts. You stop waiting for a number to save you. You stop expecting one promotion, one raise, one breakthrough to finally make everything feel okay. Instead, you start building safety the way it really happens, in layers. A little less debt. A little more cash. A lifestyle that doesn't collapse if something changes. These aren't dramatic moves. They're quiet ones. But quiet moves are what last. The goal was never to escape uncertainty. The goal was to learn how to live with it without letting it run your life. And when you do that, something unexpected happens. You stop feeling like you're standing on the edge and start feeling like you're standing on your own ground. In the end, this story isn't really about money. It's about control. Not control over markets or interest rates or the cost of housing. Those will always move beyond any one person's reach. But control over how much fear those forces are allowed to carry into your daily life. When you build even a small amount of financial space, something changes. You breathe differently. You make decisions more slowly. You stop reacting to every headline as if it's a personal threat. The world stays uncertain, but you stop feeling like uncertainty owns you. That's what real progress looks like for this generation. Not becoming untouchable, not getting rich fast, just becoming steadier than you were before. If you earn a high income and still feel on edge, you're not broken. You're living in a time where safety has to be built, not assumed. And every quiet step you take towards stability, every buffer, every lighter obligation, every calmer choice, is you reclaiming something that matters more than status. Not wealth, not perfection. Just the ability to stand in your life and feel okay being there.